Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Monday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 3rd of August now. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information by going online to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. You can always give us a call on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. And if you've been following along on Facebook or Twitter today, you've probably seen news about some of the warm weather parts of Alaska have been enjoying or perhaps suffering through, depending on what your view is on that. On Facebook today, we talked about some of those record highs, and on Twitter, both from the NWS Alaska account and the NWS Anchorage account, we've been sharing some of the actual high temperatures reached today, including 80 degrees in Juneau, a toasty day down there in the state's capital. Here are some of the record highs set around the state, and there are probably going to be some more. Anchorage hit 78 today. That was besting a record high set several years ago. Juneau, 80 degrees. It also hit 80 in King Salmon, if you thought it was a little toasty out in Southwest today. And it's going to be warm again on Tuesday. As the weather pattern is slowly shifting a little bit, we'll get some more relief as we head into Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. That is if you're ready for the cooler weather to set back in. In the meantime, temperatures around the state combined with low relative humidity in a few places are continuing the relatively high fire danger. And some of that is in southwestern Alaska and still over the Kenai Mountains and around the Talkeetnas, and also across the middle Yukon Valley and parts of the Copper River Basin. But it should be noted, of course, that this is a drastic improvement from how we began our spring and early summer. But there still is fire danger out there, and depending on which communities you're in, you want to make sure you check in with your local fire officials and check the fire danger before you do any open burning. Always a good rule of thumb. Now here's a look at the Bering Sea, and let's see what kind of activity we have on this date. As you'll notice out across the eastern part of Asia, we still have a lot of Pacific moisture pooling up there. Not a very strong feed, though, into the Gulf of Alaska or the North Pacific. We have high pressure still in charge of the Bering itself. You're not seeing a whole lot of stratus or fog on this particular satellite view, but you should be able to see that high pressure is pushing clouds up the western side of the Bering. But that means it has to go somewhere else. And when you look at the rest of Alaska here with the visible satellite picture, you're going to start to see more of a northwesterly movement coming across the Brooks Range and areas north of the Bering Strait. There are signs of some cooler weather coming in, with a cold front dropping in across the Chukchi Sea and hitting into the middle interior probably by Tuesday night and into Wednesday. So watch for some weather changes there, starting in the northwest and then moving into the interior as we go through the remainder of the week. But what you don't see in most of this picture is a lot of cloud cover across southwest, across the upper Kuskokwim Valley, across south central Alaska. Just a beautiful sunny day across the 49th state, especially in the southern third. And where sunshine was breaking out across northern parts of southeast, it was toasty there too. Once again, Juneau hit 80 degrees. Now, if you look south of Sandpoint, you can see a giant pinwheel here. This is our next area of low pressure. But remember, we talked about high pressure sitting across the Bering Sea. So as the high sits here, the low pressure system's trying to work northward, and it's having a really hard time doing that as that high pressure system's kind of holding at bay. Watch this move one more time, and you can clearly see the areas of fog and stratus out across the Bering Sea. As that just kind of sits in place, you'll see the cartwheeling action of that low pressure system here, and areas of fog and stratus kind of snaking their way over into southern parts of southeast. As clouds and stratus build out across the Brooks Range, tomorrow that will become cumulus, and then by the afternoon we'll likely see a better chance of showers and thunderstorms developing across the Alaska Range, and probably points north as some of that cooler air starts to rush into the interior of the 49th state. Now today you can see the cold front up across the Chukchi Sea coast. Here's the coastline here. Here's the frontal boundary with the arrows pointing in the direction of travel of that cooler air. It's the leading edge of that cold. Low pressure sitting south of the Alaska Peninsula will drop to about 1,001 millibars. It may go a little bit lower as we head through tonight. High pressure holding tight across the central Bering at 1,028 millibars. Areas of fog and stratus. It's what those two double bars indicate. And high pressure across the western Alcan at 1,024 millibars. High pressure was also breaking up a little bit, enough so to allow a weak disturbance to drop southward across southeast. With that, clearing conditions there across northern southeast in the capital city. Again, allowed it to be a fairly warm day. Tonight's forecast keeps things pretty clear across most of the interior, with low pressure sitting pretty much in the same spot across the western Gulf at 1,005 millibars. Watch for a few areas of showers along that occluded front that's slowly traveling northward. By tomorrow, it'll be traveling more eastward than north, so we don't have any expectations that this is going to make it up to the Kenai Peninsula. High pressure sitting across the western Canada, still working a disturbance slowly southward. Out ahead of that, a few showers across the Dixon Entrance and parts of British Columbia. With high pressure sitting across the Bering, it hardly moves at 1,028 millibars. And that means a better chance for areas of fog and stratus across the Bering, the western coast, and really most of the Aleutians. But on the far west side of that, you start to see some pockets of rainfall traveling from south to north. That'll be working toward Kiska and Attu as we head toward tonight and tomorrow. And showers are expected across the north slope and across the Arctic coast itself. A better chance of that around places like Barrow and out toward Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse. By Tuesday, that cooler air reforms and drops a little bit further southward across the Chukchi Seacoast. Along that line, look for more clouds to form up against the Brooks Range summits and points north. You'll start to see the clouds break up a little bit more in the west, west of Point Lay and Point Hope, perhaps by Tuesday night. But in the meantime, we get into a south and westerly flow that should bring in some warmer and perhaps slightly wetter and unstable air across the Alaska Range and into the middle Tanana Valley. That could actually be a good thing, because many places tonight and tomorrow are going to be dealing with some smoke that's lingering along the Yukon Valley and points northward. So a reduction in visibility tonight could mean some improvements tomorrow once that air mixes up. But as that happens, showers and thunderstorms could be possible into the afternoon. Watch for that if you're flying through some of the passes tomorrow. Low pressure south of Kodiak Island will rise to about 1,006 millibars, and we'll have a little bit of drier weather across the eastern Gulf. But there's still a circulation sitting across western British Columbia. That will bring some showers and clouds through the southern half, maybe even the southern two-thirds of southeastern Alaska. So the really hot weather that you've had today probably won't be back in its entirety, and for the northern areas again tomorrow. Areas of fog and stratus will still be found out across the Bering Sea. Look for some brighter, sunnier days there from Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta up to Norton Sound and Nome once again. As we get into Wednesday, colder air is still working its way southward, running up into some of the mountains and foothills there across the Seward Peninsula, and still working southward into the interior. As it does so, it's had another opportunity to reach into some showers and thunderstorms across the Alaska Range and parts of southwest, so expect those showers and storms to form up one more time. As the center of low pressure moves very close to Fairbanks and closer to Eagle, you'll see a better chance of that convective weather moving into the western part of the Yukon perhaps by Wednesday afternoon. High pressure is still sitting in the same spot in the Bering Sea, and while it doesn't seem to affect a whole lot here over the open water, it is reaching into eastern Asia and grabbing some warmer air and pushing that northward. So that'll be traveling north of the Bering Strait as we get into Wednesday afternoon toward the Chukchi Sea. Not horribly fast. There's a high pressure center here sitting just north of Barrow, kind of holding that warmer air at bay for now. And then across the Gulf of Alaska, we have two waves of low pressure now. This is the original wave that was working across from areas just south of the Alaska Peninsula. And now we've got another circulation forming out ahead of that will bring in some wetter and slightly cooler air toward coastal areas of southeast as we get into Wednesday afternoon and evening. In the meantime, South Central doesn't have a big surge of cold or dry air anytime soon, but it'll gradually start to fill in with more clouds and a better chance of showers as we get toward the latter part of the week. Same goes for the Copper River Basin, though that may be one of the last places to get some of this unusually warm weather toward the midweek. Let's take a look at what happened today. Many areas across southeast saw some warm air across the northern sections. The temperatures there closing in on 80 degrees again by the end of the day. It was down to 78 by 3 o'clock, 50s and 60s for most parts of central and southern southeast. Ketchikan and Annette in the lower 60s. Hyder was about 63, 64 in Sitka. Prince William Sound saw temperatures today in the mid to upper 60s. A little bit more trouble getting those really toasty temperatures into coastal areas like Cordova and Valdez. It was a little bit on the warmer side there, but not as warm as it was in Anchorage and Kenai, both areas in the lower to mid 70s. 78, the official high in Anchorage today. Talkeetna, toasty, but not record-setting, only 75 there this afternoon, 69 in Northway, 74 in Eagle, and 70 in Fairbanks, again with smoke in the interior. 66 around Fort Yukon, it was 70 for Arctic Village, 68 in AKwx Pass, 40s and 50s for many along the Arctic coast. Barrow was 44, a little bit more toward the interior. You get to AKwx and it was 50 degrees there. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse were both in the mid-50s. It looked like Wainwright was 45, I should say. Nome was 49. Unalakleet was 51. Grayling showing 66 with Galena at 65. McGrath a toasty 76. Bethel 71. And many areas in Southwest also saw record-setting temperatures, including King Salmon today hitting 80 degrees. It was 78 by mid-afternoon. Mid-50s around the Alaska Peninsula. Sand Point, Cold Bay, and False Pass all reaching into the mid to upper 50s by late afternoon. Kodiak was 62. 52 degrees in St. Paul with Adak and Atka both reporting temps in the 50s today, but not quite for Shemya, 49 there out at Attu. Overnight low temperatures will stay in the mid-50s for the interior. South Central, upper 50s around Cook Inlet. It looks like Prince William Sound temperatures a little bit closer to the 50-degree mark. Upper 40s around Kodiak tonight. Lower to mid-50s for southeast. You can see northern southeast will be some of the warmer readings we should expect tonight. 47 for St. Paul, upper 40s and low to mid-50s for the Alaska Peninsula. 48 in central and western parts of the chain. 30s and 40s for the Arctic coast with Nome at 46, and high temperatures tomorrow will be warm again from the Yukon Valley and Kuskokwim Valley all the way through the interior, with many locations there in the upper 70s to probably lower 80s. You'll see about 78 in Fort Yukon, 81 in Fairbanks, 73 around Bethel, upper 70s to lower 80s around South Central once again, and once again places like Anchorage could be looking at record heat. Upper 70s for northern parts of southeast, but compare that to southern southeast. A little bit of a different story with more clouds and a better chance of precipitation there. Lower 60s are expected. For the Arctic coast, a warm day. 40 degrees in Barrow, 43 in Wainwright. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse closer to 50. Nome looking at temps in the upper 50s to about 60 degrees. The northern parts of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta in the lower 60s. 50 around St. Paul, and the chain generally in the lower to mid 50s once again for your Tuesday. Now on to flying weather. You'll see MVFR conditions flirting with a chunk of central and southern parts of southeast into the Dixon entrance. A much better chance of seeing worse visibility and lower ceilings from Kodiak Island southward across the Pacific coast of the Alaska Peninsula. IFR is expected there. Out across the Bering Sea, not all of the region will be under IFR conditions. In fact, many areas a little bit further east will have a much better chance of seeing VFR conditions as you get into the Kuskokwim Bay and the Bristol Bay region. North into the Bering Strait, look for MVFR and a little bit of IFR across the western tip of the Seward Peninsula, and certainly eastern Norton Sound as you get into the afternoon, and all along the Arctic coast, following in the wake of that cooler air dropping southward. And as always, showers and thunderstorms imply reductions in visibility and isolated areas of turbulence and icing, so watch for that. In AKwx Pass, we expect MVFR to develop as the day goes on, mainly on the northern edge, following again that cooler air advancing southward. Same goes for Adigan Pass as we go through your Tuesday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect VFR. Showers and thunderstorms could develop in the afternoon there, and for Rainy Pass, VFR otherwise, and smooth sailings expected. Windy Pass, we expect to see VFR. Watch for showers and storms there on Tuesday, and also for Isabel Pass, watching for visual flight rule in Mentasta for all of the day. Not expecting a whole lot of thunderstorm opportunities there, at least initially during your Tuesday afternoon. Tanita Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions there. For Portage Pass, we expect to see VFR, and for Chilkoot and White Pass, also expecting visual flight rule conditions for all of your Tuesday. The freezing levels show a big bubble of warm air sitting right across the interior, southwest, and south central. No wonder it's so warm across the region today. Some of that, again, working its way into northern southeast, where freezing levels as high as 10,000 feet were found. Also have a little bit of warmer air across the central and northwestern parts of the Gulf and across the central chain, with cooler weather showing up across the Chukchi Seacoast. Icing potential is as high as 10,000 feet or even higher across the Brooks Range, so only light to isolated moderate levels there for general aviation interests. Out across the Alaska Peninsula and the Kodiak Island region, we expect some pockets mainly on the Pacific side above 10,000 feet, and also across the southern parts of southeast tomorrow. Most of that, again, also light to isolated moderate at worst. Two areas of low pressure showing up in the upper atmosphere. This, of course, the driving force of all of our surface weather. The Arctic jet stream working its way through the northern parts of the Brooks Range at 80 knots or so, and two other circulations here across the Pacific. One of those already into British Columbia, and another just mirroring what we see down at the surface there. So very light winds around that. But the overall flow is from the south and west and is gradually moving this system eastward. However, the conveyor belt of weather up north is what's allowing that colder weather to drop southward. So at 9,000 feet, we can see winds are already coming in from the west and northwest at 15 to 30 knots. The circulation across the North Pacific sitting at 20 to 30 knots, and we have a weaker circulation just around the Dixon entrance. That's bringing in those light northerly winds, but just the perfect setup there to keep things nice and warm and sunny around places like the capital city. High pressure across the central Bering, dragging in southerly winds across the central and western chain. Those are at 20 knots, and at 3,000 feet, they're a little bit slower from most areas there, around 10 to 15 knots. A northerly flow cutting through the Bering Strait at 15 knots there, working with low pressure south of Kodiak Island. Light winds for the interior, and for the North Slope, those winds were around 15 to 25 knots, with northerlies also working along the coast and southeast at about 10 to 15 knots. So there's not any great focus for turbulence, with one exception, and that would be around the Alaska Peninsula tomorrow, where we have low pressure just to your south. Below 4,000 feet, watch for some light to isolated chop there. Most of that, again, not terribly widespread, but if there is going to be some occasional stronger winds develop, those will be in those gaps, and we'll paint in some occasional moderate there, but most of that, again, should be light to isolated moderate through most of the day. And watch for a few bumps there across the eastern parts of the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back in just a few minutes with an update on the sea ice edge and, of course, the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in to Hangar Flying. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to our show. Our guest this evening is Joel Hart. Joel was on last time. He's the Alaska Deputy Region Director for the National Park Service. Joel, welcome back.
Thanks again for having me.
We're starting the month of August, and August has always been the most dangerous month for flying safety. With Joel, last time we talked a little bit about his background with the troopers, his experience managing Lake Clark, and now at the National Park Service headquarters. He talked a little bit about the team of pilots and the aviation program he had at Lake Clark, which was an example of true professionalism. Tonight I want to focus on flying in the month of August. It's dangerous, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out why. Start a hunting season, the weather's not particularly good, and a lot of changes and challenges. Joel, you talked last time about the value of your pilots, and one of the things you didn't mention, but you and I have talked about, is they got to fly just about every day. Mm-hmm. How does that compare with the guy or gal who decides to go moose hunting and hasn't flown all year, or flies once a month, or flies 20 hours a year?
Well, I mean, they're just not comparable. I mean, you've got folks that are flying every day and they're refining their skills on a day-to-day basis, and by the time hunting season rolls around, they've refined their ability to manage the airplane in the conditions as good as anybody can do. And that's a sharp contrast to somebody who's shaken off the cobwebs, you know, a few days before hunting season starts, and they'll be in some of the more challenging flying conditions that they've had, whether that's in geography, by weather, or by their lack of recent experience. That combination is not conducive to flying your best.
One of the likely contributing factors in some of our recent accidents was decision making, and you and I have talked about that, or more appropriately maybe is faulty decision making. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I've always said to folks, you know, park your ego at home when you're flying. You know, really, judgment is your ability to manage risk. That's what judgment boils down to. And folks that approach flying without that background are setting themselves up for some serious consequences. And I equate that with my law enforcement career. You pick people that have good judgment. You look at selection factors to ferret that out early on. And pilots, the good pilots, the pilots with longevity have that same background in judgment. Folks that don't approach flying with the idea that they've got to bring their thinking game to the flying are going to be surprised, and that's not something you want in flying.
I like that quote, when you go flying, park your ego at home. Wow. One of the questions I try to ask each of my guests is, and you've mentioned some things that are already that if people would pay attention, flying would be safer, but is there one thing that you could narrow down, if one thing we could fix or change or get everybody to do would really turn the corner?
Well, you've got to get into people's heads. So I would say trying to get people to expect the unexpected and manage for it. You know, if we could do that, I think we could change how people encounter difficulty in flying. I mean, if you're flying always expecting the unexpected, you'll prepare for it and you'll have a game plan for it. And again, that's something that I fall back in my law enforcement career. You're trained to expect the unexpected, and there's a close parallel to flying. And I think that's something that in the training environment, maybe if we imparted that earlier on and reinforced it through a person's career, through the BFRs and proficiency check rides, just getting people to think about the unexpected and preparing for it could go a long way towards preparing people.
Anything you'd like to add?
Well, flying in Alaska is a joy. You know, I've been in the backs of airplanes for pretty much my whole life, and in the front of them for maybe half of it. But it's a responsibility too that people have to understand, and approaching it with that mindset. It's not just a recreational opportunity or a business opportunity. It's also a responsibility to everybody else that's doing the same thing. We're all sharing the skyways together, and we're sharing in the training components and our interactions with the industries that regulate flying, and together, if we could address in a better way the accidents that we see routinely throughout the year, we might see a difference. But if we all collectively keep doing it independent of one another, we're probably not going to make much impact.
Thoughtful words. Joel, thanks for your service to the state. Thank you for your service to Park Service, and thanks for being on the program tonight.
Thanks for having me again.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program. Till next time, fly safe.
Thanks, Harry. We'll see you again on Friday. Here's a look at the sea ice edge, and you'll notice that there's been a kind of slow melting in place for many areas along the Beaufort Sea coast and then around the Hannah Shoal just northwest of Wainwright. The overall motion continues to be very slowly to the west, and we expect this to start drifting a little bit more to the east and northeast with time. Now, anytime you want to check out the sea ice concentrations or the forecast for where it's going to be in about 5 days, you can do that easily by going to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php and get the real details there as analyzed by our Alaska Sea Ice Program experts. Here's a look at the forecast across southeastern Alaska. As we go through Tuesday, light northwesterly winds will become a little bit stronger, 20 to 25 knots there in all areas. One exception would be the Clarence Strait at 10 knots with a 2-foot sea. The coastal areas looking at 4 to 7-foot seas, and the inner waterways looking at about 2 to 5-foot seas, with the highest around the Lynn Canal there. The winds will become a little more southerly with time on Wednesday, 15 to 25 knots. Southeasterlies remain in the Clarence Strait at 10 knots. Look for an onshore flow south of Sitka to the Dixon entrance with 10 to 25 knots, and southeasterlies diminish there north of Cross Sound into Yakutat and Icy Bay, 10 to 15 knots with a 5 to 6-foot sea as we head into Wednesday. For south central, winds should be light and variable in many areas along Cook Inlet and inside Prince William Sound. We will see a light southeasterly flow picking up east of the Barrens and east of Kodiak Island, about 15 to 20 knots with a 5 to 8-foot sea expected there on Tuesday. Northeasterlies inside of Shelikof Strait. For Wednesday, a south and southwesterly flow develops in Cook Inlet. That's still holding around 10 knots, and we'll see light and variable winds around Prince William Sound and outside into the western parts of the Gulf, still holding around 10 knots with 4 to 6-foot seas developing. Easterly winds coming into Kodiak Island, and northeasterlies remain inside of Shelikof Strait with a 15-knot wind and a 3-foot sea. For the Alaska Peninsula, light northeast winds coming out of Bristol Bay at 15 knots, 7-foot seas down the coast on a northerly wind with 20 knots, east and north winds on the Pacific coast there with 6 to 7-foot seas for the Alaska Peninsula. And by Wednesday, look for a light and variable flow to develop west of Castle Cape to Chignik with a 10-knot wind and 4-foot seas. Otherwise, northerlies inside of Bristol Bay and northwesterlies coming into the Pacific or the Bering Sea coast there a little bit further south with a 20-knot wind and a 7-foot sea. That continues across into the Pacific side with a 5-foot sea expected there on Wednesday. Northerlies will be found across the central and eastern chain. Northeasterlies for the central and western parts of the chain with a southeasterly return flow from Kiska to Attu at 20 knots with a 7-foot sea. By Wednesday, north and northeasterly winds are found across the central and eastern chain at 15 to 20 knots, a little bit stronger south of Unalaska and Nikolsky with a 6-foot sea. And you'll notice easterly winds now develop from areas west of Adak all the way out to Attu at 15 to 20 knots with 5 to 6-foot seas in all of those areas. For the west coast, a west and northwesterly flow develops there. High pressure sitting just west of the Pribilofs, keeping that air moving in across the YK Delta and the coastal areas there around Nunivak Island. Look for north and westerly winds to reach around 20 knots with a 4 to 5-foot sea. Northerly south of Nunivak Island into the Kuskokwim Bay at 20 to 25 knots, 5 to 7-foot seas with higher seas there around St. Paul and St. George. By Wednesday, northerlies continue out of the Bering Strait across St. Lawrence Island and over Nunivak Island. That's still holding around 20 knots with 4 to 5-foot seas in most areas. We'll have a northwesterly flow around the St. Matthew Island waters, and easterlies develop across the Pribilofs with a 20-knot wind and 6-foot seas by midweek. Across the Arctic coast, north and westerly winds are following cooler air into the Brooks Range and the coastal plain. Winds will be a little slower out across the southern parts of the Chukchi Sea and outside of Kotzebue Sound at 10 to 15 knots. Otherwise, west and northwest winds around 20 for most areas in the Beaufort and Chukchi with 4 to 6-foot seas. Winds diminish a little bit and become northerly with time as we head through the midweek. All areas looking at about 10 to 15 knots, 20 knots west of Kotzebue Sound, and 3 to 5-foot seas in the Chukchi with about 2-foot seas in the Beaufort Sea coast. That's your marine forecast. Recapping what's going on tonight, shows us low pressures across the western Gulf, dragging a front northward with some showers across Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula. Showers across the coastal plain, otherwise clear skies for many, including areas around Juneau and points north. A few showers and storms could develop during the midday tomorrow as colder air drops out of the Arctic and heads for the interior by Wednesday. That's your Alaska weather. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Thank you.